I'm 81 years old. Early last spring, I found myself doing something on a Tuesday afternoon that made absolutely no logical sense to anyone watching. I was sitting on my back patio here in Scottsdale. The sun was beating down on the concrete, the temperature was hovering around 85 degrees, and I was wearing a pair of incredibly thick, heavy wool hunting socks. I hadn't gone for a hike in the mountains. I hadn't been standing in a freezer. I was just trying to get my feet warm. For weeks, both of my feet had felt like they were resting at the bottom of a bucket filled with ice water, completely regardless of what the thermostat said inside the house or what the weather was doing outside. I would sit in my armchair in the living room, wrap a heavy fleece blanket tightly around my ankles, and wait for the deep chill to finally pass. But the cold never really went away, because the cold wasn't coming from the room. It was coming from deep inside my own body. When you have lived inside the same physical frame for 8 decades, you develop a terrible, quiet habit of normalizing your own daily discomfort. You start to tell yourself that having cold feet is just a standard, unavoidable penalty for getting older. You assume your internal furnace is just tired, and that it simply doesn't have the power to push the heat all the way down to the basement of your body anymore. I reasoned it out in my head. I told myself it was just poor circulation, a simple mechanical plumbing issue that I could easily cover up with thicker cotton and heavier wool. I bought thermal socks. I bought expensive slippers. I treated the symptom exactly like a homeowner treats a drafty window in an aging house, trying to aggressively stuff cheap insulation into the cracks instead of doing the hard work of figuring out why the foundation was shifting in the first place. I spent over 30 years of my life working in community health education back in Ohio. My entire career was built on standing in front of working class folks and helping them understand the mechanical realities of their own health. I spent decades teaching men who worked the heavy assembly lines not to ignore the quiet warning lights flashing on their own internal dashboards. I knew how to translate medical jargon into plain truths. Yet there I was, sitting in the Arizona heat, actively ignoring a massive flashing red light simply because it didn't hurt. That is the true danger of this specific condition. It rarely presents itself as a sharp, undeniable pain, at least not in the very beginning. It presents as a quiet absence of warmth, a slow, creeping fading of normal sensation that is incredibly easy to brush off as a meaningless annoyance of aging. Margaret used to joke that my feet were like space heaters. When we were younger, she would always press her freezing toes against my feet under the heavy blankets in the dead of the Ohio winters just to steal some of my heat. The bitter irony that I was now the one freezing from the inside out was not lost on me, but I still refused to take it seriously. The reality of what was actually happening to my machinery didn't click into place until I was talking with my son Daniel a few weeks later. Daniel works as a physical therapist up in Denver, and he spends his entire week dealing with the hard structural realities of the human body. We were having a very casual conversation on the phone about how his clinic was running, and I happened to mention my ridiculous new routine of wearing winter hunting socks in the middle of the desert. I fully expected him to chuckle and tell me I was just getting old. He didn't laugh at all. He got very quiet on his end of the line. He asked me to do something very specific. He asked me if my feet actually felt physically cold to the touch when I rubbed them with my bare hands, or if the freezing cold was just a phantom sensation trapped entirely inside my own head. I had never actually thought to check the physical temperature of the skin. I put the phone down on the coffee table, took off my heavy wool sock, and wrapped both of my hands tightly around my right foot. My skin wasn't cold. It was perfectly warm. It was the exact same temperature as the palms of my hands, but deep inside, beneath the skin and the muscle, my foot still felt like it was buried in a snowbank. When I picked the phone back up and told him what I felt, Daniel explained that I was completely misunderstanding the mechanics of the problem. I wasn't experiencing a plumbing problem. The blood was getting down to my toes just fine, which is exactly why my skin was warm to the touch. I was experiencing an electrical problem. He told me to think about the complicated wiring hidden inside the walls of my house. Every single nerve in your body is essentially a microscopic copper wire, carrying vital electrical signals from your brain all the way down to your toes and back again. And just like the electrical wires running through your walls, your nerves are wrapped in a protective outer coating. The medical term for this coating is myelin. It acts exactly like the thick rubber insulation wrapped around a power cord. As we get older, if the daily conditions in our bloodstream are not well maintained, that protective rubber insulation starts to wear incredibly thin. It gets brittle. It starts to strip away piece by piece, leaving the raw, delicate electrical wire completely exposed to the elements. When an electrical wire is exposed, the signals start to misfire entirely. The brain gets deeply confused by the broken signals. It starts interpreting normal, everyday input as a burning sensation, a heavy tingling numbness, or very often a deep, phantom cold. My feet weren't actually freezing in the Arizona sun. The stripped electrical wires in my extremities were simply sending a corrupted, broken signal back up to my brain, and my brain was translating that massive error as a drastic, dangerous drop in temperature. The medical community calls this process peripheral neuropathy. It is a slow, silent, creeping death of the furthest nerves in your body. And the most terrifying part of this mechanical failure is that it is a highly progressive decay. If you do not actively intervene and stop the insulation from stripping away, the cold sensation eventually turns into a sharp, burning electrical pain that keeps you awake all night. And if you continue to ignore that pain, the wire eventually burns out completely and permanently. The nerve dies. You lose all physical sensation in your feet. You lose your essential balance. You can step on a piece of sharp glass in your kitchen and never even feel it, leading to massive silent infections that simply cannot be healed. This exact process is exactly how so many older folks end up losing their mobility, their limbs, and ultimately their independence. I realized sitting in my chair that I had to stop treating this like a minor circulation issue and start treating it like an active electrical emergency. I made an appointment with my primary doctor that same week to find out exactly what was eating away at the insulation in my wiring. The very first thing we looked at was my daily blood sugar. Now, I'm not diabetic. I have never been diagnosed with diabetes in my life. But my doctor explained a fundamental truth that I had completely missed in all my years of health education. You do not have to be a full-blown diabetic to experience devastating nerve damage. Even moderate, persistent daily spikes in your blood glucose act exactly like battery acid on your fragile nerves. The kind of spikes you get from eating too much processed bread, heavy pasta, and hidden sugar over a period of decades slowly corrodes that protective coating. That excess sugar in the blood is actively dissolving the insulation. I had to take a very hard, honest look at the fuel I was putting into my engine every single day. Growing up in the Midwest, a proper dinner was always heavy on the starches. We ate potatoes, thick dinner rolls, and sweet desserts every night. I was still eating like a man who spent his days doing heavy, brutal labor in a manufacturing plant, even though I was spending my retirement reading books and walking the dog around the block. I started making deliberate, unglamorous daily changes. I ruthlessly cut out the refined sugars and the heavy carbohydrates that I knew were spiking my levels. I started eating much more lean proteins and fresh vegetables that keep the blood chemistry stable and calm. I intentionally stopped pouring acid on my own wiring. We also looked closely at the raw materials my body actually needed to rebuild that damaged insulation. My doctor pointed out that as we age, our stomachs naturally become much less efficient at extracting specific, necessary nutrients from our food, particularly the B vitamins. Vitamin B12 is the exact, specific raw material your body uses to manufacture that protective rubber coating for your nerves. If you do not have enough of it circulating in your system, your body simply cannot repair the daily wear and tear on the wires, no matter how hard it tries. I started taking a highly absorbable B-complex supplement every morning, deliberately giving my internal factory the actual building blocks it desperately needed to patch the exposed lines. And finally, I completely changed how I treated my feet physically. I stopped burying them in heavy wool socks and sitting perfectly still in my armchair. Nerves require constant physical stimulation to stay alive and to heal. It is a fundamental biological principle of use it or lose it. I started doing specific targeted foot exercises every single morning while I drank my black coffee. I would place a hard tennis ball on the floor and roll it deeply under my arches for 10 minutes. I would spread my toes as wide as they could go and press them firmly into the hardwood floor. I intentionally forced the electrical signals to travel down those damaged pathways, demanding that my brain keep those critical lines of communication open and active. It was not a sudden overnight miracle. Fixing damaged electrical wiring inside the human body takes a considerable amount of time, discipline, and deep patience. But after about 3 solid months of changing my daily fuel, providing the right raw materials, and forcing the electrical connections to do their job, I noticed a profound shift. I was sitting in my living room reading the paper one evening, and I suddenly realized I wasn't thinking about my feet at all. The deep, aching phantom cold was entirely gone. The electrical misfires had finally quieted down. The insulation was holding. This is the absolute truth I want to leave you with today. If you are sitting in your house right now, piling on heavy blankets, wearing thick socks in the middle of the afternoon, and your feet still feel like blocks of solid ice, do not just accept it as a harmless, unavoidable quirk of getting older. Take your shoes off. Put your bare hands on your feet. If your skin is warm to the touch, but your bones feel freezing cold inside, your plumbing is likely fine, but your wiring is actively failing. Your body is sending you a desperate flashing signal before the lines go completely dead. You still have the power to protect your foundation. You still have the time and the capacity to change the chemistry of your blood, to give your body the exact materials it needs to heal, and to stop the decay before the damage becomes permanent. Do not ignore the quiet warning lights just because they don't hurt yet. Talk to your doctor about your blood sugar and your vitamin levels this week. The independence you value so highly depends entirely on keeping those tiny lines of communication open. Take care of yourself this week. I'll see you next time.